Hello. All right. I am so sorry. I'm using a new software right now and I don't obviously know everything I'm doing. So thanks so much for your patience here. I really appreciate it. And I'm so happy to see so many people. Oh, good. So glad you can hear me, everyone. It's so great to see so many people. It really is. All right. Denmark, UK. Wow. Barbara Ann, Heike, Timothy, Linda. Oh, it's so great to see so many people. It really is. Okay. So, thank you so much for joining me for today's topic. And like I mentioned, I'm using a new software to go live, so there might be a few more glitches going on, but just bear with me. I thought that this would be a really fun exploration to really talk about the fashion industry and kind of my experience in the last 20 years working in the fashion and active sports industry, and I had so many questions too. I sent out a list or a survey to my email list, and I think a lot of you responded, so thank you so much for all of your questions. So I have a lot of questions that I'm going to get into, and I thought maybe I'll start with a little bit of my journey. I think a lot of you already know a little bit, but I thought maybe we should just go over that so you can understand where I'm coming from. So I am originally from Colorado in the United States, and that's really in the middle of the US, in case you're not familiar with the geography there. And I grew up in Colorado, and I really wanted to go to fashion school, and that really developed in my teen years in high school. I met a friend, my best friend Kate, in high school, and she sewed, and she came up to me one day and she said, "Oh, I love your pants." And I said, "Oh, thank you, I made them." And she said, "No way, I made mine too." And so from that day on, we were best friends in high school. That was our sophomore year, and then just decided I wanted to pursue this dream of going to fashion school. And so I went to the the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York City, and did the fashion design program there. And then I worked in high fashion for 3 years and really loved that. That was really beautiful tailored jackets, like kind of Chanel looking jackets, and then beautiful gowns. Oh my goodness, we used some really gorgeous fabrics, and fabrics from Italy and France, and now actually I'm in Europe, so now I know a little bit more about where all those fabrics came from back from when I was working in New York City. Then I decided I really wanted to work in the sportswear industry, into action sports in particular. So I moved to California because I really thought that my two main options were either New York or California. And now that I've been in the industry long enough, I know that that's not true anymore. There are so many more options out there, and don't limit your beliefs to that. So moved out to California, and within a few days I got a job there at Oakley, and I worked there for a year and a half and focused on the board shorts and also on the snowboarding clothes and ski apparel. Then I moved over to Vans and also did the snowboarding clothes there and also board shorts there. And then I kind of switched into streetwear jackets as well. Then I moved to Germany with my husband. He got a job in Germany. And so we moved there together, and I requested with Vans. They had a Switzerland office, and I requested that I would basically pitch to them that I would work from home and freelance for their Switzerland office. So I did that for about a year, and then got a job in Switzerland. And so my husband and I moved to Switzerland, and I've been here now 8 years. And I did lead a team of pattern makers and developers for another action sports company out here. And since January, I've basically been going all in with my own business, which is Gina Renee Designs, and published the fitting book last year. That took a lot of effort to write, and yeah, so that's a little bit about my journey. Let me see. I would love to hear from you. How many sewists do we have, or how many pattern makers do we have out there? What do you like the most about sewing? Is it designing, or kind of what are your interests? So put in the chat in there and let me know what you think of what your interest is. All right. Wow, so many people from so many places. This is absolutely amazing. Oh, it's so fun to see. Yeah. All right, so I'm going to get right into, oops. What did I do? Oh, I hope this is still working. Oh. Oh no. Is it still working? Because on one end it's not working. One of the screens is not working. Okay, great. You guys can still hear me. Thank you so much. All right, well, I'm just going to keep going. I can't see myself, but you can still hear me. That's fantastic. So we have people learning how to make patterns, fitting. Okay, learning about fitting. Fantastic. All right. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get into the questions now. So I have the first question that somebody asked in the email survey I sent out is, let's see here. And now it's not wanting to work here for me. Yeah, the questions aren't wanting to come up. Let's see. All right, let's see if I can move myself over. All right, so the first question was, is there a unifying voice in the fashion industry? So I thought that this was actually one of the hardest questions I received. And it's because there isn't a direct answer to that one. And so a unifying voice, I would say for sure high fashion kind of drives this industry. I'm going to slide myself back in there. I don't know if you can. Yeah, there we go. Sorry, I'm still learning this stuff. A unifying voice. So there are many trade journals that the industry follows, and one of the big ones in the US is called Women's Wear Daily. And this is a trade journal that a lot of fashion brands follow, and they kind of come up with the trends, and they also share that. So it's a subscription-based model, and there are many, many more of these types of models that are out there, and Europe even has their own as well. So this is kind of, these trade journals do follow those fashion trends, and then people kind of pick up on those, for kind of, it trickles down from those really high fashion brands to the more mid-tier, to then action sports, and then the really tailored garments to different types of garments. So it could be, yeah, not only action sports, but maybe regular sports and that kind of thing as well. So yeah, that is a great question, though. And as far as a unifying voice, then besides fashion trends, I think all designers look at each other, right? So they're all looking at those fashion weeks, and everybody's kind of seeing what those trends are, and picking together and putting those things together, because often maybe one designer will be really on their own colors and silhouettes and everything, and then other designers might be a little bit more similar. And so you can kind of pick up different sorts of trends that might come together in the future, just based on watching fashion weeks. So yeah, the next question I have is, oh, I got it to work this time. So let's see here. Is there a oh, I got that one already. Oh, sorry. What are the stages from design to the store? So the stages from the design level all the way up to the store. And that is a great question. That question, I want to actually start off by explaining more of the product development process on the behind the scenes in the fashion industry and also in the action sports industry, because they are a little bit different. And I would say the action sports industry also goes in line with the lower end fashion tiers. So, yeah, there are different steps with them for sure, but the concepts are all quite similar. So we'll go ahead and talk about those stages. And the first stage generally in bigger companies is that you have what's called a merchandiser, or they could also be called a product manager, product line manager, or a category manager. And so you have the same term for the same role, basically. And different companies call this role something different. Every single company I've been in has different names for different roles. So this type of person is really, you would say like fashion merchandising would be more of their kind of major in school, possibly, and they really focus on what the trends are in the industry, and they come up with what are called USPs, which are unique selling propositions. And then they say, okay, these features, a USP, are really important for the garment to have. They need to have this many pockets, this many features, basically. And then they also say trends, and they'll kind of give an overall feedback and briefing to the designers. And then those designers come up with the designs, and they have to fit within those requirements. So if it needs to have this many pockets or this many features, it needs to be a hooded or a collared garment or a long sleeve, short sleeve, all of those things, then the designer designs into that. And oftentimes those merchandisers or product line managers will work really closely with sales, and they'll be doing a lot of analytics on the back end to see what is selling well, in order to come up with the entire collection that they brief and say, we need this many styles. Designer then takes it from there and they design into that collection. So the designers often will come up with many designs, and every company is different with this part too, because in high fashion they kind of skip that merchandiser often and they just go to the designer deciding what they want in the collection. So that's a big difference between kind of middle tier fashion and action sports and sportswear versus high fashion. And the design then really decides the fabrics, they decide the colors, and usually the fabrics and colors actually come after the design. So they have what's called a product line review meeting, or internal design meeting, or design meeting. And that's, again, all terminology, and it's all different for every company. So they have a design meeting and they design everything into the collection, and then they present it usually. And who they present it to also varies for every company. It could just be the development teams, like the product development teams, who's really designing, and that merchandiser or that product line manager. And then they kind of review that. Or it could kind of go to the wider management as well. So the wider management might overlook that line. They'll see those collections and they'll see those designs on a design level. And then that merchandiser or the product line manager will often put everything together and make it into kind of these little mini collections. Let's call it like that. But then, of course, this varies for every company too. So That's the general process as far as the briefing and the design goes. Then the designer hands it off to the product development team. And that product development team also varies a lot per every company. So the product development team can be a product developer, which is somebody who often creates a list, which is called a bill of materials, and they list out everything that's in the garment, like the buttons and the zippers, the fabrics, the threads, and all the packaging and everything. Then they'll also usually drive the costing. So they'll make sure that it's being produced in the right cost and it's going to create the correct margins for the company. So that's generally what a product developer does. And that product developer is really common in the kind of the lower tiered fashion industry. I guess high fashion, it really depends. If you're kind of a really high fashion, then you would kind of skip some of those steps. And then some companies will have pattern makers. Other companies will have technical designers, and some companies won't have either of those. They'll just have the developer handling kind of the fit and the technical part of things. So the developer, that product developer, also generally handles workmanship details. So like if something's not sewn correctly, they'll give comments and they'll say things like that it needs to be fixed. And then as far as a technical designer goes, a technical designer would be somebody who gives fit comments, and they also handle the measurement chart, but they don't do the actual patterns. So they don't draft the patterns. They don't necessarily make pattern corrections, but they'll tell the factory how to correct it. So the product developer, the technical designer, they often work directly with the factories overseas usually, or in different countries. So that's their main role, is to make sure that product gets developed to the quality and to the standards that it should be. Then we have pattern makers, and usually you'll have either a technical designer or a pattern maker, and in some cases you will have just that product developer doing all of those roles. So that really varies per company. And a pattern maker, let's say in the 80s and 90s, it was really common to have pattern makers in most companies. And now it's really much more common to have those pattern makers in high fashion, but not always in the lower tiered companies. So pattern makers, it has come back to main brands because at a certain point, I would say in the late 90s to really early 2000s, everything was going overseas to the factories, and they were handling all of the patterns, which is part of the reason why we have a big variation in fitting. And then a lot of the time, then the brand realizes, oh, we don't have as much control. So then they backtrack and they take it back and they take that control back on, which has happened more in more recent years. But it is the tendency, unfortunately, that the pattern maker roles do happen in the factories now more than I'd like to see. But I think pattern making is the most critical part in the whole process to make sure it's done correctly. So when companies say they don't have a pattern team, I would rather have the pattern team in-house for sure, because it's so much more control, especially if you've trained those pattern makers well and that they understand how to manipulate those patterns and everything. So the product developer, technical designer, pattern maker creates that garment, or they give the instructions, and then the factory makes the first and second prototypes. So that's kind of those processes. Then it goes into multiple prototypes. We'll go through prototype 1, 2, and then some companies will have what they call salesman samples or sales samples, and that's what the salesmen sell to different brands. So, and then it goes to production after that. So those are kind of the general topics, or the stages, let's say. So, all right. All right, I'm just checking some of the comments. Oh, it's so great. So, yeah, FIT stopped offering pattern making in 2005. Yeah. Yeah, I think, yeah, it's really unfortunate to see that there aren't as many pattern making degrees out there. Um, but it's great to see that some of you have gotten trained in it. Fantastic. Okay, so they offer a technical design program. So that's definitely more common now, I would say. Yeah, thanks for your comments. It's great. Okay, so that's about the stages from design to the store. And then we'll go into the next question, which is, oh, we already did that one. Who, how, and especially when are designs, colors, prints, and patterns decided on for the season and the year? So that's a loaded question. And we even have another one on top of it. How can we influence this? So really, really great question here. I'm going to take a sip of water, sorry. Okay, so let's go back here. So patterns as far as prints go, so a print on a fabric or something like that, the colors, the fabrics, the qualities of the fabrics, those all get decided in that design process. So usually it is the designer who's driving that fabric selection. However, if a certain style sold really well in the past, that merchandiser or product manager could request a certain fabric as well. And that would be done in the brief then. As far as prints go, that is usually decided in that briefing if the style should be printed, have a print on it or not, so that merchandiser or product line manager, I'll just call it a merchandiser for now, even though that word can change for every company, they usually would say this needs to have a print. It needs to be a place print, or it needs to be an all over print. And that all over print would then be a fabric print versus a screen print or a heat transfer. And so then the designer would design into that basically. Then the fabric team, which I actually forgot the fabric team, and my friends are going to not be happy with me about this one. Sorry, girls. All right, so the fabric team has a huge role, and oftentimes they also get kind of stuck with that innovation of fabrics too, which it can be kind of clumped into one thing with research and development, which is a huge topic in itself. And then you also have the sustainability aspect of that. But fabrics are then usually handed over from the fabric team to the designers, and they usually present at the beginning of the season of what is new in the industry or what's kind of coming or trending. And then the designers will often select different things from those fabric collections, or they'll say, I want this, but I want it to have this hand feel, or I want it to be this stretchy, or they'll kind of say what they don't like about it. And then that fabric team has to actually develop those into those qualities that they want. Or maybe they want another finishing or another coating or something like that on the fabrics. So let's look back at that question really quickly. So that's design, colors, and prints, and then the patterns. So the patterns would be really like, in my opinion, the silhouette or the shape of the garment, and whether it would be kind of tight fitting or loose fitting or regular fitting or any of those types of things. Or maybe it's more of a design style silhouette and they want something new. That would usually be first briefed by that merchandiser and then carried through to design, but design often has their own opinion about that, whether that style should be that silhouette. So there's often a little bit of discussion there first, and then the product development team executes it to what the requests are. So that usually happens in that design handover process, that you're making sure that the pattern maker or that technical designer understands what kind of silhouette they want, because that then affects their measurements and their patterns and the fit and everything. So usually then the pattern maker or technical designer would take whatever measurement standards they have for that silhouette. Okay. And that last loaded question was, how can we influence it? So this is a great question. And I think now with social media, we have all sorts of different influences that we didn't have previously. And I think the biggest influence is really when those trends start and when people really grasp them. And a great book about this concept is The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. And he talks about trends and how they can kind of really spread, basically. And it is an interesting book. And if you're more curious about that, I would highly recommend that book. But it can be just one person that could spark a trend. And it's amazing how that one person can really have an influence on so many people. So I do believe that it's not impossible to have an influence on fashion. I think it takes the right person, it takes the right personality, it takes the right following, or the right photography, kind of so many different things to really kind of have an influence on those types of things. So yeah, just checking in the comments quickly, make sure things are good. All right. Okay. How are we doing? How's everybody doing out there? All right. I see we have quite a few people watching, so thanks so much for joining still. All right, so the next question we have, can a sewist run or be a part of a business? And what are the roles of sewists in the industry? So this term sewist is definitely a newer term. It used to be generally a seamstress or tailor, usually, for menswear. But it just has come up more recently, this term of sewist, and I like to think of it as like somebody who sews, because the word sewer in the English form doesn't necessarily sound so good, because it's also the same word for so a sewist is really like somebody who sews, and then I kind of combine that word of artist. So combining those two words, it makes me think of it's like more of an artsy type of person, somebody who sews though. And maybe it's not somebody who sews as a living, but maybe it's somebody who sews as a hobby. And definitely people who sew in the industry are generally in sample rooms, and then of course on those factory sewing lines in the factories. And many of the high fashion companies do have in-house sewing rooms and what they call prototype rooms. And the first company I worked at in New York City, they did all of their own draping on the mannequins. They didn't do flat pattern first. They really designed it on the mannequin, on the dress form, and then sewed it directly without really doing full fittings. They just fit it on the mannequin. And also that word, in some countries it's mannequin, in other countries it's dress form. It doesn't matter. And so a sewist could really have a role in one of those sample prototype rooms, or also of course at the factories. It is coming back more that there are more R&D rooms, which R&D is research and development, and they often will create different mock-ups in those rooms. So this is what we did a lot at Oakley. I would do a lot of sewing there, as far as I had an idea of a new way to pull out a ski pass from a pocket, and I had this idea. I'm going to connect elastic to it inside and sew it up and trial it out on a garment. And so you could definitely do those things. Most of the time these days, though, people are giving those instructions to the factories for them to make up the mock-ups. So that's more common for sure now. And if the company, the brand, has their own factories, which they own, then they might have a special sample room in that factory. And that way they can kind of speed up that process too. But that's definitely not common in this industry to have your own factory for the brand. All right, so let's see here. Next question, we have, how many test garments are made before going into production? So this is a great question, and it really varies a lot, because sometimes you might have one prototype and it might be perfect, and you might go straight to salesman sample, which is what those salesmen sell to the different stores, the different retail stores. Or you might get a style that's just so difficult and you have to get sometimes many samples before it can actually get to production. But generally, most calendars allow 2 samples. Fast fashion allows 1 sample usually. It depends on the company. Other fashion houses will do all the samples in-house and even the fitting samples too. So they'll speed up that process often by doing that in-house. And it really depends. Generally, I would say 2 samples, then it goes to salesman samples. But if you're a company like an H&M or other brands out there that don't sell to other stores, they only have their own stores, they wouldn't have salesman samples generally. Of course, unless their model is different. And I'm not saying I know their models or anything. And every company has different kind of ideas here and roles and the way they process these things, but these are just the commonalities of what I've seen just from working in the industry. So oftentimes a company that doesn't sell to a retail store, that's not their own, they will then have just 1 or 2 protos and then they'll go straight to production. And sometimes they could see what's called a pre-production sample, and other times it might be free for production, meaning it's approved, and they might proceed from there. So, yeah. All right. How do you know what fabrics to use, and where do you find good fabrics? So this is a great question, and this is a really hard one because fabrics vary a lot for every single brand and what type of garments they're making. So, where they find specific fabrics, it can be all over the world. And there's not really one place that has all the types of fabrics you would need. And it really depends on the quality too. How much are you willing to pay for that fabric? Of course, some countries are much more expensive than other countries. And so then we really have a variety of types of fabrics, and then, of course, a variety of locations. And I think generally sustainability is a much bigger topic nowadays, which is a great thing. And people are paying attention to how far things are traveling a little bit more. Of if you're going to be making something, let's say in Europe, you try to get the fabrics there. Or if you're making something in another country, you're trying to get the fabrics in that region type of thing. So those kind of concepts are definitely playing a bigger role right now. And we did have a lot of questions about sustainability and, good living conditions and this type of thing for factories, factory workers. And I'm not going to get into all of those questions today because there were quite a few. And I thought maybe in the future we'll just go ahead and do that as a separate topic. All right. So the next question we have is, why is there no standard sizing from brand to brand? Vanity sizing seems to reign. All right, that's a great question. And there have been many companies who have tried to standardize and make standards in this industry. A lot of them have. There are many American standards, basically, and it's really up to the brands whether or not they want to follow them. And you have to also consider that we have so many different cultures and varieties of body shapes out there, that if there was a standard, then it's likely it's not going to fit everybody in that standard. And so that brand really has the ownership of what they say their target customer is, for the sizes, the shapes, the heights, and everything. And that brand then says, this is our target customer. We are making clothes for this type of customer. So let's say you're a high fashion brand versus a a cycling brand, somebody making clothing for cycling. And you have kind of these really elite athletes that have very different body types than like a high fashion type of person. And so you can't necessarily have a standard across the entire board. And even in the different tiers of fashion, whether it's high fashion, middle fashion, or fast fashion, then you also have to consider those are different customers too. They're different body types too. So oftentimes you have kind of a younger customer, and you have to make sure those garments fit to that kind of junior versus Mrs. and women's wear. And so we have lots of different ideal customers, let's just say. And in a way, I try to look at it as, yes, there aren't as many standards as, of course, we'd like it to be. And the vanity sizing has absolutely taken over. On the other hand, there is a good part of it that there's a bigger chance that you're going to find a brand that's good for you. And in that way, we have more variety, we have more selection, and maybe you can find a couple brands that are good for you. And of course, some people just are not going to fall into any of the standards, even if they were standardized and all the same. So yeah, that's why we sew, though. That's why we have so many options of designing and sewing our own clothes. I just love all these questions. All of them have been so great, haven't they? All right, the next one we have, is it better to work for a very large company or for a smaller company? And I have to say, I haven't worked for a company that's had a massive amount of people. So I've generally worked for the first fashion company I worked for had only, I think, 100 people. The other companies, it's been several hundred, and probably now up to thousands. But considering that some of them have had their own manufacturers too. So it really depends on if you're including that too. So I would generally say I like a brand that's between 100 people and, let's say, 300 people in the headquarter office. But it depends, of course, on your liking, because for me, I like to have lots of opportunity, and in smaller companies, you have a lot more responsibility, but it gives you that opportunity along with it. And so if you're in a really big company with thousands and thousands of people, especially at the headquarters, your role is going to be in a box, and that's going to be it. Versus at smaller companies, you're going to have to do lots, but you get also a lot of experience from that. And I really like that. I like the challenge. I like the change of the job role, and how you can kind of take more on if you want more, and you can really push for your job description of what you want to take on and what you want to handle. And so I'm maybe a little bit biased toward that answer, but that's my opinion. And I know a lot of other people really love working for larger companies, and I think that's a great experience too. There are so many companies out there that have a lot of people who are very, very experienced, and no matter where you go, you're going to learn a lot if you're working for a small company or a large company. And every place is different, and you can't compare really one to the other, because even though all of these commonalities are quite similar themes throughout most of them, it's still going to be a different experience. And one person might say they might not like one brand, but they might like another brand instead. And I think that really, it's really personal too. It's really based on preference and your own experience there. So I do think that everybody needs to make their own decision on, smaller, big brands, or don't take somebody else's word for it necessarily. Okay, then let's go into the next question. Where do I start if I have no formal training? So this is a great question. The first thing I would recommend here, if you have no formal training, I would say it would be great to start with a few courses, whether it's at the school or online. Try a few courses of what you think your interest might be and go from there and decide, is this something that you really like, or do you like to keep it as a hobby? Because one of the questions earlier was, can a sewist have a business? And absolutely, a sewist can have a business. You can have your own clients and you can be your own designer for your own clients, or design for yourself and make it a hobby too. So it's not necessarily either or here of working for a big company or a small company or clients or this type of thing. So, sorry, one second. All right, lots of talking. So where do you start? I would recommend starting with taking a couple courses in the field that you're interested in. And like I said, there are lots of different jobs in this field. Don't think it's only fashion design, because it's not. That was one of the things that I didn't know about when I applied to school, that there were all these other programs too. I just didn't know. That information was not super easily accessible to me at that time of making that decision and going into fashion design. At the end, I'm very glad I did, because I got a very well-rounded education of including pattern making, of including development, including textiles and illustration and draping and all of those things. And it was an excellent curriculum. But I think it's good to try different things. Sorry. So it's really good to try different things. Yeah, this is where my voice tends to go. It's about the 45-minute mark. All right. But there's also things like a buyer, and a buyer will then buy the different garments and they'll kind of select the garments for a retail shop, or you have a merchandiser for a retail shop. And that merchandiser then selects different garments as well. And they might be a visual merchandiser making different visuals for the different stores too. So you have so many different options, and don't think it's just design, because there is so much more out there. All right. I'm going to try to make it through here. Let's get to the next one. How's everybody doing out there? All right. Oh, it's so great to see you, Trisha. Yes, yeah. Oh, so nice. All right. Okay, let's go on to the next question. Sorry. Design skills, which one is more valued by employers when first entering the industry? Design skills or technical skills like pattern making? So this kind of goes into that same last topic that I was just talking about. And to me, being more of a pattern maker, I was also called technical designer in the past, also called a product developer, and pattern maker, team leader of a pattern team, all of those different kind of product names. But I generally go toward the technical side because it's what I like. And I decided really early on in that fashion design program that I love the technical part, because it really let my designs come out of my head into a form and a shape that I envisioned. And that's why I love that technical part, because it makes me feel like a complete designer, because I can really realize those designs that I envision. And so I think from a company perspective, they need both roles. They need that designer, they need that product developer, technical designer, pattern maker. All of those roles are critical to them. Of course, designers might have another opinion. And I'm sure if any of them are watching this who I've worked with, they would definitely say design is, better. But for my approach, I think you should go with what is your specialty and what drives you, because that's going to be really the key here. And the company needs everybody, right? It's not one person that makes the product. Every role is important, and there are a lot of jobs in all of those roles. So yeah. All right. Let's see here. The next question. How does a designer differentiate ideas from what's already out there? So this is a great question because, I think every artist kind of struggles with this sometimes. I don't know if you consider yourself an artist or not. I kind of think I'm an artist in a little bit of a 3D form as far as fabrics and making garments and such. But I think, so much has been done out there, but I don't think it should stop us from taking that and changing it a bit and making it our own. I'm not saying that we should copy what's out there. I definitely don't think so. But I think that there are ways to differentiate it. And I think that should be actually a question you ask yourself of, if you really love a style that you see out there, how can you make it better? How can you make it more you? How can you make it more your style? And that's it's a really fun topic to get into, of really defining your own style. And that's actually one of the online courses that I've been creating, is defining your own style and customizing it. And defining what silhouettes you like, what kind of fabrics you like, what colors you like, and all of those things. It's all a big part of defining your style. And I think that if you're kind of a creative person, which you are, I know you are, you'll find ways to differentiate. And designers do. They absolutely do. They take maybe a main design, let's say a high fashion design, and that's all the other people are taking little bits and pieces of, oh, I like this, but I would change it to be like this. And, that's how creatives work. And that's actually what fashion school teaches you to do, is to, evaluate those trends, see what things you like and what things you can take to make it into your own collection. And that's part of the process, actually. So yeah, so I think I just got through all of the questions right now. I'm going to check back into the chat here. I'm so glad that so many people have joined. Yes, I do have a PDF version of the fitting book. It's at ginareneedesigns.com. You can buy it there. Oh, it's so great to see everyone. Oh, somebody's knitting and listening at the same time. That's wonderful. And so many people, I'm just looking at where everyone's from. Finland, Florida, UK, Denmark, Illinois, Cleveland, Illinois again, California. So amazing. So fantastic. Oh, somebody's up early in Australia. Thank you, Jan. That's wonderful. So yeah, I wanted to say thank you so much for joining me. And I'm going to do this again. This was a lot of fun, even though I'm still technically not 100% savvy here. But it's really been a lot of fun, and I would really love to see you again. I'm going to go ahead and ask you to like this and subscribe so that you can get a notification of the next live. And if you're not on the email list, you can also sign up for the email list by clicking the link. There are different links below for free fitting guides, free sewing guides, and free sewing patterns as well. And once you sign up for any of those that you might like, then you'll be on the email list and you'll get in on the next survey that I send out as well, so that I can answer your questions. And yeah, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate your time. I hope you found this valuable and insightful, a little bit interesting. Yeah, thank you.